Welcome to our Sunday School Bible study time here at Southwest Park Baptist Church. This is our lesson for Sunday, April 13th. It's our second lesson in this 4-week unit of study that's entitled God Delivers His People. We're in the book of Judges. This week our lesson is entitled God Works Through His People. Our focal passage is in the fourth chapter of Judges. Both the fourth and fifth chapters we'll look at because they deal with the same incident there. Last week we saw the first three judges in Israel where God delivered Israel from their oppressors. He used Othniel to deliver Israel from the Aram, and next he used Ehud to deliver them from the Moabites, and then finally at the last verse in chapter 3, Shamgar saved them from the Philistines. So this week, as we move into chapter 4, Ehud has died, and so Israel falls back into that pattern that we talked about last week of idol worship. And so again, we see the cycle, the discipline that followed. God sold his people into the hands of an oppressive king. And so again, we had to see a judge raised up to deliver Israel. So that's the subject of our lesson this week. We pick up our focal passage in your literature, picks up with verse 4, but let's look at the first 3 verses. When Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. And so the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth Hagoyim. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he harshly oppressed the children of Israel. So, as we see here, the next major oppression at the hands of the Canaanites came through Jabin and his army commander, Sisera, and it seems to have affected primarily the northern tribes. Jabin lived in Hazor, which was once the largest city in Palestine. It's a few miles north of the Sea of Galilee, and it's on the main route between Mesopotamia and Egypt. Jabin doesn't play a very prominent role in the story. He's the king of that region, but his army commander, Sisera, is the one that is talked about most in our story. His strength lay mostly in these 900 chariots. That number of chariots is a large number. And it reflects the hopelessness of the Israelites' plight against such a force. These chariots of iron were a technology that Israel didn't have, and so they posed a huge challenge to an army that just had infantry to fight. And so with that advantage, Sisera terrorized the tribes for this 20-year period. Verse 2 says that the Lord sold the Israelites into the hand of Jabin. That's an interesting phrase that's used there, and it reminds us that last week in chapter 3, verse 8, it tells us that the Lord sold Israel into the hands of Cushan Rishathaim there. So in what way did the Lord sell his people? That phrase has theological and symbolic meaning. It reflects God's judgment on Israel's disobedience. By turning away from their covenant with God, the Israelites essentially relinquished their protection, their divine protection from the Lord. And the Lord selling them into the hands of their enemies signifies His allowing their subjugation as a part of the disciplinary process. In ancient times, the act of selling often implied ownership, still does today, and transfer of control. And so here the phrase kind of symbolizes the fact that God, as Israel's ultimate sovereign, handed them over to foreign oppressors to face the consequences of their actions. The Lord sold them by allowing them to be defeated by a pagan nation. And this domination by their enemies left them in a state of hopelessness and in virtual slavery. Moses used the same word in Deuteronomy 32 in his prophetic song. Deuteronomy 32:30. How could one chase 1,000? Two put 10,000 to flight, unless their rock had sold them and the Lord had surrendered them. So Israel clearly had been warned that God would indeed sell them to their enemies if they forsook them. And so this is what we see in both of these instances in chapter 3 and chapter 4. That brings us up to verse 4, and that's where our lesson writer picks up with our first point. So let's look at verses 4 through 9. Deborah, a prophetess and the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to settle disputes. She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh and Naphtali, and said to him, "Hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go, deploy the troops on Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the Naphtalites and Zebulunites? Then I will lure Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, his chariots, and his infantry at the Wadi Kishon," some your translations say River Kishon there, "to fight against you, and I will hand them over to you." Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go." "I will gladly go with you," she said, "but you will receive no honor on the road you're about to take, because the Lord will sell Sisera to a woman." So Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. So God raised up this courageous woman named Deborah to be the judge in the land. Deborah means bee, I'm told, B-E-E. The Lord raising her up was an act of grace, but it's also kind of an unusual thing in Israel, because they lived in a male-dominated society that generally wanted just mature male leadership. And so Deborah here is described as both a judge and a prophetess. She's one of the few women in the Bible that's explicitly described as a prophetess, meaning she received divine revelation from God, and she foretold those revelations. Moses' sister, Miriam, was described as a prophetess back in Exodus 15. Later, Bible history will introduce us to Huldah, Noadiah, Anna, and the 4 daughters of Philip, all described as prophetesses. Verse 5 tells us that she would sit under this palm tree that became known as the palm tree of Deborah. And it's described as being between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And Israelites went to her to settle disputes. And God blessed Deborah for her trust in him, and because people recognized God's hand on her, they sought her out for her wisdom. Unlike most of the judges that we're going to study about, Deborah was not a warrior herself, but she was deeply respected for her wisdom, her ability to hear a message from God. Her leadership was unique as she combined the roles of spiritual guide, judge, and military strategist. She held court under this palm tree in the mountains of Ephraim, and that became a gathering place where Israelites sought her wisdom and judgment. A lot of Bible students think that Deborah was from the tribe of Ephraim since she lived there, and her residence in Ephraim indicates her tribal affiliation. The Bible does not explicitly state her lineage. Deborah's leadership as both prophetess and judge in ancient Israel is significant, particularly in this male-dominated society. Deborah's role as a leader wasn't based on societal norms, obviously, because most of the judges, most of the leadership was male. But it was based on her divine calling. Her wisdom, her faith, her ability to communicate God's will made her the right person to guide Israel at this time. In ancient Israel, leadership, especially military leadership, was associated with men. Deborah's position defied these norms, highlighting that God's plans and purposes transcend human cultural boundaries. And we've seen that repeatedly up to this point as we've studied through this part of the Old Testament. Deborah inspired others, including Barak, to act. Her assurance in God's promises rallies Israel to victory, as we'll see here, against the forces of Sisera. Deborah's story is often seen as a symbol of empowerment, and it illustrates that God uses whoever he chooses. Women have always played vital roles in God's unfolding narrative, even in a society that was decidedly patriarchal. As a judge, Deborah combined spiritual, judicial, and military leadership, and she unified those diverse aspects of governance in her service to the Lord and the people of Israel. So in Deborah's leadership, her response, we see the importance of following God's calling regardless of what society expects. And her legacy continues to inspire people. So she's an important figure here in Israel's history. Verse 6, the Lord commanded Deborah to challenge Barak of Naphtali to confront the troops of Sisera. And Barak, the name means lightning or something in that order there. He's described as being from Kadesh. It's also known as Kadesh Naphtali. It's located in the upper Galilean region of modern-day Israel, near Israel's border with Lebanon. Kadesh was historically significant in that it's one of those 48 Levitical cities that we studied about a few weeks ago, and one of those 6 cities of refuge that we studied about. Naphtali and Zebulun are the tribes that are initially summoned here, and they covered most of Israel's territory north of the Jezreel Valley. Mount Tabor rises about 1,300 feet from the valley, and so its reference there as a meeting place was a clearly defined meeting place. Barak was told to lead the way, and if he did so, God would lead the enemy into the trap. We see that in verse 7, where Deborah tells that the Lord has revealed to her that he would deploy or lure Sisera and to fight against Barak, and that he would hand him over. The Lord would hand him over to Barak. Deborah revealed that the site of the battle would be near the Kishon River, or the Wadi Kishon. That river flowed in a northwesterly direction through the Jezreel Valley, emptied into the Mediterranean north of Carmel. During the summer months, it's pretty much dry there. Some translations use Wadi Kishon, our Christian Standard Version that our literature uses describes it that way. And that's a term that was commonly used in the Middle East and North Africa to describe a dry riverbed or valley that typically remains dry for most of the year, but can fill with water during periods of heavy rain. And so that's the physical description of the place where all this is going to take place. And despite Sisera's military advantage, including his iron chariots, those 900 infamous iron chariots, God assures Barak that the victory is already determined. God will deliver Sisera into Barak's hands. Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I'll go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." Warren Wiersbe points out that we know that God's commandments are God's enablements, and that we should obey his will in spite of circumstances, feelings, or consequences. But we don't always do it. To his discredit, Barak hesitated to lead the Israelites in battle. His insistence that Deborah accompany him kind of diminishes his heroic stature. And as a result, there will be consequences of that. Deborah agrees to go with him, but she predicts that the glory for the battle, the glory for winning the battle, will go to a woman. Now, at this point in the story, the only woman that we have mentioned so far is Deborah. So the natural assumption would be that Deborah's the one, but the narrative will introduce us to another woman shortly. The Quest Study Bible points out that after 20 years of oppression at the hands of the Canaanites, Barak had reason to be concerned, and Deborah as a prophetess was recognized as one to whom God spoke, so perhaps Barak wanted her to accompany him as insurance that God would go with them and assist them in rebelling against their oppressors. Barak's insistence on Deborah's presence kind of emphasizes his respect for her role as prophetess, her trust in his trust in her connection with God. Deborah, as prophetess and judge, represented divine guidance, and so Barak may simply have been seeking reassurance through her participation. But it may also suggest uncertainty or fear on his part. Facing this well-equipped army, he may have doubted his ability to succeed without her spiritual authority and leadership. When Barak insists on her presence, Deborah agrees without hesitation, saying, "I'll surely go with you." And so that demonstrates her courage, her readiness to take action. But she also delivers that prophetic statement: the glory of the victory will not belong to Barak, but will instead be given to a woman. So our lesson writer points out that God's discipline and God's encouragement are not mutually exclusive. They can occur together. Barak was given all he needed for the battle. At the same time, he was chastened for a lack of leadership and trust. Similarly, Peter was rebuked for denying Jesus, and yet the Lord told him, I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail, in Luke 22:32. Sometimes discipline itself can provide encouragement, reminding us we are God's children, and reminding us, as Hebrews 12:7, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? Our second point picks up in verse 10 and is in verses 10 through 16. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now Heber, the Kenite, had moved away from the Kenites, the sons of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and pitched his tent beside the oak tree of Zananim, which was near Kadesh. It was reported to Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. And Sisera summoned all his 900 iron chariots, all the troops who were with him, from Harosheth of the nations to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, Go, this is the day the Lord has handed Sisera over to you. Hasn't the Lord gone before you? So Barak came down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord threw Sisera, all his charioteers, all his army, into a panic before Barak's assault. Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth of the nations, and the whole army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a single man was left. So Deborah went with Barak, and her support helped him raise the necessary troops. They began their search for troops in Kadesh, which was Barak's hometown. Judges 4 here specifically mentions Zebulun and Naphtali as the tribes called upon by Barak to engage in battle against Sisera. Judges 5, verse 15, suggests that the tribe of Issachar was also involved in the conflict. Chapter 5, by the way, is called the Song of Deborah. And after the events that we read about in chapter 4, this was a celebratory song that was sung that kind of recounts the events there. And so sometimes it provides a little bit of information that we don't have in chapter 4, which is the case here. The verse states there in chapter 5 that the princes of Issachar were with Deborah, and that Barak, who was leading the army, had Issachar's support as he went into battle. Now that could mean that Issachar played a leadership role or offered tactical support rather than troops there. But the Song of Deborah in chapter 5 praises some tribes for their bravery while criticizing others for their lack of involvement in this battle against Sisera. Some from Ephraim joined the fight with their roots traced back to Amalek. Members of Benjamin also fought in the battle. Machir, a clan within Manasseh, participated in the battle. But then it also tells us that Reuben stayed behind tending sheep instead of joining the battle. Gilead, likely referring to Gad, chose to remain beyond the Jordan River rather than engaging in the conflict. Dan stayed near their ships, and Asher remained by the seashore instead of fighting. So it's not real clear who all was involved and to what extent, but certainly Zebulun and Naphtali, those two northernmost tribes, bear the brunt of this action against Sisera. Verse 11 gives us some information, new information here. It's kind of inserted in the story. Here we're introduced to Heber, the Kenite, and he's described as a Kenite affiliated or related to Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and it tells us that he had moved away from the Kenites there and pitched his tent near Kadesh. The Kenites were nomads, and they lived mostly in the arid regions of southern Judah. They're relatives of Moses, and the relationship between Moses and Hobab has been a subject of some debate due to different translations and interpretations. Some time ago we studied back in Numbers 10:29, Hobab is referred to as the son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, which suggests that Hobab was Moses' brother-in-law, being the son of Reuel, also called Jethro, who's widely recognized as Moses' father-in-law. Here in Judges 4:11, Hobab is described as Moses' father-in-law in some translations. The confusion likely comes from this Hebrew term that's translated there, Chothen. It can mean father-in-law, but it can also refer more generally to a male in-law, such as a brother-in-law. And context is usually helpful in determining the specific meaning. So most traditions lean toward understanding Hobab as Moses' brother-in-law. That kind of brings another issue into the picture here. Hobab and Heber are described as Kenites. Jethro, back in Exodus, is described as a Midianite. The Midianites were a large nomadic group descended from Abraham through his second wife, Keturah. And we see that back in the 25th chapter of Genesis. Jethro, like I say, is identified as a Midianite and described as a priest of Midian. So the Kenites are often viewed as a smaller, distinct group within the Midianite people. They're associated with craftsmanship, metalworking, and this nomadic lifestyle. We're not given any details as to why, but for some reason, Heber here made this decision to separate from the rest of the Kenites and settle here near Kadesh. And his positioning near Kadesh is going to play a significant role as the narrative unfolds. Verses 12 and 13 shift back to Sisera. And Sisera got the word that Barak had gone up to Mount Tabor. And so he summoned all his chariots and all his troops there and went to that area. At that point, Deborah says to Barak, "This is what we've been waiting for. Go. The Lord has handed Sisera over to you." Now, humanly speaking, Barak's little army had no chance against such might. But Deborah said that this was the opportune moment. and she encouraged Barak by saying that the Lord had gone ahead of him. And that phrase was used in that day to describe a king marching at the head of his army. So the imagery there, the symbolism, the Lord would take the lead in marching ahead of the troops and striking down the enemy. To his credit, Barak responded decisively. He moved his troops into position. Our lesson writer points out that what was implicit in verse 13 becomes explicit in verse 14. The Lord gave Sisera into Barak's hand. Neither the movement of troops nor how the battle proceeded was happenstance. Any human observer would have seen Barak and his army fighting the battle, but God was in control. God will accomplish his purposes through his people, but all the glory belongs to him. Even the superior technology of the Canaanites could not rival God's power and glory. Earlier in the narrative, Sisera and his army seemed particularly fierce because they had this massive force of 900 chariots. Yet with Barak empowered by God, the vehicles that once seemed unstoppable now were on the run. The Lord's role is even clearer in verse 15 as he routed Sisera's army. This routing probably took place by rainstorm, because as we see in chapter 5 in Deborah's song, a sudden downpour overwhelmed Sisera's chariots. Even Sisera was forced to abandon his chariot and flee north away from the heated action. The conflict took place at Tanakh, some 5 miles south of Megiddo. Like I say, Deborah's song in the next chapter, starting in verse 19, gives us a little more detail. The kings came and fought. And then the kings of Canaan fought in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no spoils of silver. They fought from the heavens. The stars from their courses fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. That ancient torrent, the torrent of Kishon, O my soul, march on in strength. So, after this routing, after the Lord threw the charioteers and Sisera into a panic, and Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and the army, and the whole army of Sisera was wiped out. As it tells us in verse 16, not a single man was left. However, Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. So here we are introduced to the other woman in this narrative, Heber's wife, Jael. Her name means mountain goat or ibex here, and as verse 17 tells us, evidently Heber and Jael made great efforts to be at peace with both the Israelites and the Canaanites. Verse 18, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not fear." And when he had turned aside with her into the tent, she covered him with a blanket. And then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a jug of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him. In chapter 5, there's a description of her also bringing him cream here along with the milk, and so this suggests that this was comfort food and designed to relax him and get him off his guard. He said to her, stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquires of you and says, is there any man here? You shall say no. And then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple, and it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary, and so he died. And then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man whom you seek. And when he went into her tent, there lay Sisera, dead, with the peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Now, that's a pretty gruesome story here, and a harsh ending to Sisera's life. Deborah's song immortalizes the actions of Jael. Starting in verse 24, most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Blessed is she among women in tents. He asked for water, she gave milk. She brought out cream in a lordly bowl. She stretched her hand to the tent peg, her right hand to the workman's hammer. She pounded Sisera, she pierced his head, she split and struck through his temple. At her feet he sank. He fell, he lay still. At her feet he sank. He fell where he sank. There he fell dead. Warren Wiersbe points out that Jael not only helped deliver the nation of Israel from bondage, but she helped to protect the women from vicious brutality. She wasn't a Semitic Lady Macbeth who murdered her guests for her own personal gain. There was a war on, and this courageous woman finally stopped being neutral and took her stand with the people of God. That's Warren Wiersbe's take. It's a fascinating story here, and the part that Deborah and Jael played is significant for many reasons here. We saw in the passage the calm confidence of Deborah, and then eventually the bold leadership of Barak. Neither were perfect, and neither could have done the task alone. The same is true for God's followers today. We must get our plans and power from the Lord and work alongside one another to carry out His purposes in our families, churches, and communities. We should praise God for using us, but we must remember that we're His, which helps to stay humble, teachable, and always giving the glory back to Him. Consider who God might be using to assure you of His promises and commands. Often such people are humble and quiet, serving in the background instead of taking center stage. Deborah was like that. She didn't lead the battle. She didn't call people to follow her. She told Barak to follow the Lord by leading an army, and then assured Barak of God's help. The Lord called Barak to a task so big that he needed encouragement to complete it. Christ still calls believers to tasks like that today. It may be a sacrificial gift to your church or another ministry. It may be taking a mission trip or sharing the gospel with a loved one. With God-sized ministry assignments, we should pray that God provides the encouragement we need at the right moments, and we need to be sensitive to the fact that God may want to use us as encouragers. That can occur through a phone call, a text, a note, or meeting someone for coffee. A small word of encouragement makes a huge difference. Next week, we'll move on to chapter 6 there, and we'll see another cycle of this falling into sin and oppression and then deliverance. Thank you.